Mamie Stewart, a 26-year-old Englishwoman, vanished from her residence in Caswell Bay, Wales, in 1919, an event that would later be sensationalized by the media as the Chorus Girl mystery. Her husband, George Everard Shon, who had entered into a bigamous marriage with Stewart in 1918, emerged as the primary suspect in her mysterious disappearance. Despite the investigators' strong suspicions of foul play, the absence of a body precluded any murder charges against Shon. Instead, he faced conviction for bigamy, resulting in an 18-month prison sentence. Born in Sunderland in November 1893 to James Stewart, a ship's captain, and his wife Jane, née MacGregor, Amy Stewart was the eldest of 3 siblings, with a sister named Edith, and a younger brother, James Smith Stewart. From a young age, she nurtured a fervent passion for dance and harbored dreams of gracing the stages of music halls and West End theaters. With her parents' blessing, she embarked on her career at the tender age of 15, performing as a chorus girl with a touring company known as the Magnets. It was during this time that she adopted the stage name Mamie and eventually left her familial home to fully immerse herself in her artistic pursuits. Stewart later established her dance ensemble, the 5 Verona Girls, which garnered acclaim across the nation, captivating audiences with their performances that, in a more conservative era, occasionally revealed their legs up to the knee. The police would later characterize Stewart as a striking young woman with brown bobbed hair and captivating gray-blue eyes, standing between 5 feet 3 inches and 5 feet 4 inches tall. She was noted for her very even teeth, with one missing, and possessed a graceful demeanor. A childhood incident involving a dog left her with 4 faint tooth marks on her right cheek, which she artfully concealed with makeup. By early 1917, the fortunes of the 5 Verona Girls began to wane, as one member became pregnant and another suffered a broken ankle, leading to the troup's disbandment and Stewart's return to her family home. Shortly after the dissolution of the 5 Verona Girls in July 1917, a 23-year-old Stewart met a marine engineer named George Shon in their hometown of Sunderland. Shon, identifying himself as a widower, quickly developed a relationship with Stewart, purchasing a diamond engagement ring for her within a few months of their meeting. Less than a year later, they were married in South Shields. The couple then enjoyed their honeymoon in Droitwich Spa. Initially, they settled in Bristol before moving to Swansea, where they lived in a residence on Trafalgar Terrace for 6 months. In late summer 1919, they relocated to a secluded cottage named Tai Lanwyd, overlooking Swansea Bay, where Stewart kept in touch with her family in Sunderland. Unbeknownst to Stewart, Shotton's first wife, Mary Shotton, née Leader, whom he had married in September 1905, was still alive. They had a son named Arthur, but their marriage was marked by violence, with Shotton often abusing Mary. She and their child resided in Penarth, with Mary believing that her husband's job was the reason for his frequent absences. Stewart was last seen in November or early December 1919. In letters sent in the months leading up to her disappearance, she alluded to her troubled marriage, which was becoming increasingly violent, and expressed a growing desire to leave Shotton, who was preventing her from returning to her theatrical career. The last known letter she wrote to her parents from Tai Lanwyd was dated November 12th. Shortly after, her parents sent a reply, but it was returned to them marked "House Closed." Believing there had been a postal error, the Stewarts sent a reply-paid telegram to their daughter, which was also returned with the same notation. In the days leading up to Christmas in 1919, a telegram arrived at the home of Stewart's parents, seemingly sent by their daughter, extending compliments of the season. However, this was the last communication they received from Stewart or her husband. By March 1920, staff at the Grosvenor Hotel in Swansea noted that a leather trunk, left behind by a male guest the previous December, had gone unclaimed for nearly 3 months. Lacking an address tag, the hotel manager reached out to the police, who opened the trunk to find 2 women's dresses and a pair of shoes, all significantly damaged. Additionally, the trunk contained various items, including jewelry, a Bible, a rosary, and a manicure set. Among the contents was a scrap of paper with the address of Stewart's parents. Upon being informed, they reported their daughter missing and shared their ongoing efforts to find her over the past few months. They expressed their concerns for her safety and provided police with several letters from the previous year, which detailed Stewart's growing discontent with her marriage and her fears for her well-being. Notably, they had recently received a letter from her, written shortly before her disappearance, in which she stated, "If you don't hear from me, please wire to Mrs. Hearn, a friend, and see if she knows anything about me. The man is not all there. I don't think I will live with him much longer. My life is not worth living." Investigators also found that Stewart had mentioned in her letters the abuse she suffered at the hands of Shon, her desire to leave him, and her awareness of his troubling behavior. Soon after, a maid preparing the couple's abandoned cottage for new tenants discovered Stewart's moldy brown leather handbag hidden behind a dresser in an upstairs bedroom. The handbag still contained £2 in loose change and Stewart's sugar ration card. By the spring of 1920, the South Wales police had concluded that Stewart had been murdered, believing that Shon was responsible for her death. They speculated that the motives behind the crime could have been a combination of rage, control, and jealousy. In response, Scotland Yard was notified, and Chief Inspector William Draper was assigned to lead the investigation. Draper initiated a comprehensive search of Tai Llanwyd, its grounds, and the nearby areas, but no evidence of Stewart was uncovered. A nationwide alert was issued, disseminating her description across Britain. Yet this approach also failed to produce any promising leads. Both the South Wales Police and Scotland Yard identified Stewart's husband, George Shon, as the primary suspect. Draper was able to track down Shon, who was residing in Penarth with his wife and child, just a short distance from Tai Llanwyd. Shon acknowledged his acquaintance with Stewart and admitted to leaving a trunk at a Swansea hotel, claiming he did so shortly after she departed from him following a dispute the previous December, which he attributed to her infidelity. He denied having married Stewart and professed ignorance regarding her current location. However, investigations soon uncovered that Shon had indeed married Stewart bigamously nearly 2 years prior, a fact he refuted, asserting that he had returned to his first wife after Stewart left him. Scotland Yard also reached out to Stewart's friend, Mrs. Hearn, who corroborated that Stewart had endured domestic violence at the hands of Shon and had once implored her, "If I am ever missing, do your utmost to find me, won't you?" Due to the absence of Stewart's body, the police were unable to charge Shon with her murder, as the legal framework at the time prohibited prosecution without a body. Despite their strong suspicions regarding Shon's culpability, by the mid-1920s, investigators at Scotland Yard began to refer to this case as the perfect crime. Investigators uncovered early in their inquiry that Shon had entered into a bigamous marriage with Stewart in South Shields on 25th March 1918. This charge of bigamy became the sole basis for his prosecution. He was apprehended on 29th May 1920 for this offence and subsequently brought to trial 2 months later at Glamorgan Assizes, where he pleaded not guilty, asserting that although he had cohabited with Stewart, an impostor had taken on his identity to wed her. He also refuted allegations of mistreatment, reiterating that their separation had occurred after a dispute in early December. During the trial, several witnesses attested to the legitimacy of their marriage, noting that their union had initially been harmonious. Among the witnesses was Stewart's sister Edith, who recounted that Shon often referred to Stewart as "my little wife," and typically concluded his letters with "your loving husband." At this bigamy trial, the prosecuting counsel, Sir Ellis Griffith KC, boldly accused Shon of having done away with Stewart. However, the absence of her remains rendered such claims unprovable. On the 13th of July, Shon was sentenced to 18 months of hard labor for his bigamous union with Stewart. Shortly after his release from prison, his legal wife sought a divorce. In the years following Shon's conviction, numerous alleged sightings of Stewart emerged, reported as far away as Canada, South Africa, Australia, and India, many of which garnered significant media attention. One of the earliest sightings was reported by Thomas James, the chief officer of the cargo ship Blithmore and a close acquaintance of Stewart's father. He claimed to have encountered Stewart in the port city of Karachi in the early 1920s, asserting that she was part of a troupe of English performers at a local theater. When approached by James, however, the woman denied her identity and swiftly departed. Yet James remained convinced that the woman he had encountered was indeed Stewart. In the year 1950, a dentist acquired the secluded cottage where Shon and Stewart had lived during her mysterious vanishing. In 1950, a dentist acquired the secluded cottage where Shon and Stewart had lived during her mysterious vanishing. While undertaking drainage improvements around the estate, this dentist unearthed a pit situated at the rear of the residence, adjacent to a breach in the foundation that extended beneath the dining room floorboards. This pit had been filled with quicklime, and the only item retrieved from it was a single lady's shoe. After his release from prison in early 1922, Shon settled in Tintern, where he managed a small holding. He was a frequent attendee at church and was fondly remembered in the village as a charming chap who practically ran the tennis club. However, after several years in the community, Shon abruptly departed, likely prompted by a local newspaper's revival of the story surrounding Stewart's disappearance and the suspicions cast upon him. He then moved to Balham, South London, to reside with his elderly mother, Louisa, taking on various jobs, including odd jobs and motor mechanics. In May 1938, Shon faced arrest for brandishing a revolver at his sister, Gladys Austin, in her Fareham home, leading to charges of actual bodily harm. This altercation stemmed from lingering resentment over their respective inheritances from their mother's will. He was sentenced to a year in prison with hard labor. Upon his release, Shon cut ties with his family and friends, relocating to Ledbury, where he found employment at an aircraft factory before eventually moving to Bristol. 42 years after Stewart's disappearance on November 5, 1961, her remains were discovered in a decaying sack concealed behind a large stone slab, 50 feet deep within a disused lead mine at Brandy Cove in Caswell. This grim discovery was made by three young potholers, Graham Jones, John Girk, and Chris McNamara, just 200 yards from the very home where she and Shon had lived at the time of her disappearance. One of the cave explorers, John Girk, later recounted that he and his companions had selected this particular area for exploration due to its historical use by smugglers. While the trio was investigating a ventilation shaft, they encountered a blockage in a narrow tunnel measuring approximately 10 feet in length, which was obstructed by a large stone slab. After moving the slab, Girk discovered a skull, which he turned to examine and realized was human. Nearby, he found a black celluloid hair clasp still holding a tuft of mid-brown hair, various pieces of jewelry including a 7-inch brass chain, and several fragments of clothing. The remains were subsequently transported to the Forensic Science Laboratory in Cardiff, where a forensic examination was carried out by two Home Office pathologists, William James and John Griffiths. The bones were reconstructed into a nearly complete skeleton, lacking the rib cage belonging to a female estimated to be between 5 feet 3 inches and 5 feet 4 inches tall, with one canine tooth missing from the upper jaw. 3 wisdom teeth were intact, indicating she was over 20 years old. An X-ray analysis of the growth areas in her bones suggested that the individual was a fully mature woman, with complete maturation having occurred only recently, implying she was likely in her mid-20s. Given that 2 bones at the base of her skull had recently fused, it was determined that she was unlikely to be older than 28 years. Some sections of the skeleton exhibited green staining, due to copper contamination from the brass jewelry found with her remains. While the exact cause of death could not be established, the pathologists could not rule out strangulation or stabbing. The physical characteristics of the remains and the circumstances of their discovery corresponded with the contemporary description of Stewart. Although the remains were entirely skeletonized, the clothing scraps, footwear, and jewelry found alongside them provided clues regarding the time of her death. The National Museum of Wales has confirmed that the gilt copper stole tassels worn by the deceased were highly fashionable around 1920. Additionally, the gold wedding ring and diamond engagement ring found with her were manufactured in 1912 and 1918, respectively, suggesting that her death likely occurred shortly after World War I. An elderly woman, a close friend of Stewart, identified both rings as belonging to the missing individual. With the support of Interpol, police renewed their efforts to find George Shon, with Scotland Yard dedicating 9 officers full-time to this investigation. 3 weeks later, he was discovered in Arnos Vale Cemetery in Bristol, having passed away from natural causes 3 years earlier on April 30th, 1958, at the age of 77. Shon had died without financial means and spent his final years in a care home for the elderly before suffering a stroke and subsequently passing away in Southmead Hospital in Bristol. Following his death, he was interred in an unmarked pauper's grave, which only displayed his welfare number. Shotton's first wife was still living at the time. When interviewed in 1961, she acknowledged that her former husband had a violent temper, which, along with his infidelity and her belief in his involvement in Stewart's disappearance, led to their divorce. She mentioned that she had rarely seen Shotton after their separation, and that he had never admitted any guilt to her. The formal inquest into Stewart's death took place on December 14, 1961, during which her skeleton was displayed on a table in the courtroom. Forensic evidence indicated that the body had been cut into 3 equal sections. One incision was made just above the knees at the lower femur, while a second horizontal cut was made through both humerus bones at their midsection, with the tool used also severing the lower shoulder blades and the spine. It is clear that the individual responsible for Stewart's death faced challenges in dismembering her body, as evidenced by the presence of striations and indentations on several bones, which suggest multiple failed attempts to cut through them before finally severing the bones. Notably, no ribs from Stewart's rib cage were found at the site where her remains were discovered. To aid in the formal identification process, forensic specialists overlaid a photograph of the recovered skull with a vibrant, life-sized image of Stewart from her performing days. Coroner D.R. James testified that while he could rule out skull trauma as the cause of death due to the absence of soft tissue, he was unable to determine the exact cause of her demise. He expressed his belief that Stewart had been murdered and posed a poignant question to the coroner's jury. Can you think of any reason someone would dismember a body if the death were a result of suicide or an accident? As the inquest neared its conclusion, an 83-year-old retired postman, William Simons, recounted an incident from December 1919. While delivering mail to Tai Lan Wid, he noticed Shotton struggling to load a large sack into a small yellow van parked near the couple's cottage. Simons offered assistance, and upon seeing his blue uniform, Shotton appeared startled, exclaiming, "No! No! No! Oh God, you gave me a fright! For a minute I thought you were a policeman." Simons then watched as Shon loaded the sack into the van and drove off towards Brandy Cove. On December 15th, the inquest into M Stewart's death concluded that the remains were indeed hers and confirmed that she had been murdered, although the specific cause of death remained undetermined. The jury also established that the murder occurred between November 12th and December 6th, 1919, attributing responsibility to the now-deceased George Shon. At the end of the 1961 inquest, the skeleton of Stewart was kept at Cardiff University, where the distinguished forensic pathologist Bernard Knight reportedly utilized it for educational purposes with his students. Unfortunately, no attempts were made to find any living relatives to return her remains to her family. It was not until 2019 that Stewart's great-niece, Susan Oldnall, learned of her great-aunt's remains when researchers contacted her for a CBS reality channel program focused on unsolved murders. Oldnall found out that her great-aunt's remains were stored in a cupboard within a Cardiff forensic laboratory. Dr. Stephen Leadbeater, the senior forensic pathologist at the lab, had kept the remains, despite recommendations to dispose of them, in the hope that a family member would come forward to reclaim them. Upon discovering Oldnall's interest and intentions, Leadbeater personally delivered Stewart's remains to her, allowing for a proper burial by the family. In December 2019, Stewart was laid to rest in Bishop Wearmouth Cemetery in Sunderland, alongside her parents. 4 of her descendants attended the burial service. Shortly after, Mrs. Oldnall expressed to the BBC her sentiments. She has been treated with such a lack of dignity, and now she is with her parents. I may not be religious, but I feel a sense of peace about it now. I acted as many would have, and I hope that if there is a heaven, the family is finally enjoying their time together. Thomas Neer, a prominent German industrialist, met a tragic fate at the hands of the Provisional IRA in December 1973. At the time, he held the esteemed position of managing director at the Grundig factory, located in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Born in 1928 into a working-class family in the picturesque city of Bamberg, Bavarian Franconia, Niedermayer's journey began as an aircraft mechanic in Friedrichshafen and Karlsruhe after completing his education. Demonstrating remarkable skill, he retrained as a toolmaker and ascended to the role of foreman by the tender age of 18. In 1952, he united in marriage with Ingeborg Tromowski, a fellow Bamberg native from a refugee family hailing from former German East Prussia. By 1953, Niedermayer's talents were recognized, leading to his promotion as assistant to the director of an electronics firm. Just 2 years later, at the youthful age of 27, he advanced to higher management at Grundig's Nuremberg headquarters, a leading name in European consumer electronics. In 1961, he relocated with his family to assume the role of general manager at the company's newly established plant in Belfast, marking Grundig's first venture beyond German borders. Additionally, he served as the honorary consul of West Germany to Northern Ireland. On the fateful evening of December 27, 1973, Niedermayer was abducted from his residence in the Glengoland area of Suffolk, West Belfast, around 11 p.m. 2 members of the IRA deceived him into stepping outside under the guise of a minor car accident involving his vehicle. This harrowing event was witnessed by his younger daughter, who had opened the door to the 2 men. At the time, the United Kingdom government publicly denied receiving any demands from the IRA regarding the kidnapping. However, it later emerged that there had been a brief attempt at negotiation, wherein the UK sought Niedermayer's safe return in exchange for the transfer of 2 imprisoned IRA members, sisters Dolores Price and Marion Price, from England to Northern Ireland. These women had been incarcerated for their roles in a bombing campaign in London earlier that year. Unfortunately, the negotiations were abruptly terminated by the IRA without any explanation. On December 30th, 1973, while in captivity, Niedermeyer spotted a British Army patrol and attempted to call for assistance. However, he was intercepted by 4 members of the IRA who assaulted him and struck him on the head with a pistol butt. His captors restrained him to control his resistance, but he continued to fight until he eventually became unresponsive, leading them to realize he had passed away. The following day, Niedermeyer was clandestinely interred in a shallow grave. Almost 7 years later, on March 11, 1980, the Royal Ulster Constabulary, acting on a tip-off, discovered his body, which was found face down, gagged, and with his hands bound, buried in an embankment at Colin Glen. A post-mortem examination revealed 2 skull fractures, one of which was consistent with an assault involving a Browning pistol. The autopsy could not definitively determine whether his death resulted from one or both skull fractures, a heart attack, or asphyxiation. His funeral was held in Dunmurry, and he was laid to rest in the churchyard. Eugene McManus, the IRA Belfast Brigade adjutant in 1973, and John Bradley, a 42-year-old IRA member, were charged in connection with the incident. Initially charged with murder, Bradley pleaded guilty to manslaughter during his 1981 trial, claiming he had unintentionally killed Niedermeyer while he was attempting to escape. McManus admitted to concealing information regarding the crime and his IRA affiliation. As a result, Bradley received a 20-year prison sentence, while McManus was sentenced to 5 years. Subsequent information obtained by the Royal Ulster Constabulary indicated that the kidnapping had been planned by Brian Keenan, a former employee of the Belfast Grundig factory, where Niedermeyer served as general manager. Keenan had previously engaged in several disputes with Niedermeyer in his capacity as a trade union representative. Ingeborg, Niedermeyer's wife, returned to Ireland in 1990, exactly 10 years after her husband's funeral, and checked into a hotel in Bray, where she tragically took her own life by walking into the sea from a secluded beach. Niedermeyer experienced the tragic loss of both of his daughters, Renate and Gabrielle, who took their own lives in 1991 and 1994, respectively. Renate passed away in South Africa, while Gabrielle's life ended in England. Tragically, Gabrielle's husband, Robin Williams Powell, also succumbed to suicide 5 years later in 1999. They are survived by their 2 daughters, Tanya and Rachel. The events surrounding these losses and their impact are explored in the 2023 documentary film Face Down, directed by Jerry Gregg. In the serene town of Ayodhya, India, a harrowing case from 17 years ago has resurfaced, stirring the echoes of a tragedy that devastated a family and evaded justice for far too long. The life of Mahavir Singh, a cherished son and vibrant member of the Tulsipur Majha community, was tragically extinguished in a violent act of gunfire in 2007. As time passed, the hope for resolution faded, and the case slipped into obscurity. Yet, the recent apprehension of 2 fugitives has rekindled the possibility of closure. The investigation into Mahavir's untimely death commenced immediately as the community grappled with the shock of the incident. The Gonda police faced the formidable challenge of gathering evidence while bearing the emotional burden of the case. Initial inquiries pointed to 2 primary suspects: Govind, also known as Sanjay, hailing from Lakhisarai district in Bihar, and Sitaram Das from Hanuman Kuti Ramgat in Ayodhya. Despite relentless efforts to bring them to justice, both men eluded capture, prompting law enforcement to escalate their investigation. The police employed a range of strategies, from interviewing witnesses to meticulously examining the crime scene for vital clues. However, as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, leads dwindled, and the trail grew increasingly cold. In a strategic move to invigorate the investigation and encourage community participation, The Gonda police announced a reward of 15,000 rupees for any information that could lead to the apprehension of the fugitives. This initiative not only served as a financial incentive, but also underscored the police's unwavering commitment to securing justice for Mahavir's grieving family. Despite the allure of the reward, it became increasingly clear that the suspects had successfully vanished from sight, leaving investigators in a state of mounting frustration. In the wake of the tragic events, Mahavir's family exhibited remarkable courage by initiating legal proceedings against Govind and Das. As time unfolded, the police undertook the seizure of properties and the preparation of charge sheets, yet the culprits remained at large. After years of tireless pursuit, a significant breakthrough emerged in October 2024. Thanks to the diligent efforts of the Gonda police, in conjunction with the Ayodhya police, actionable intelligence was obtained, bringing them closer to the elusive suspects. Acting on arrest warrants issued by the Civil Judge Senior Division ACJM in Gonda, the Ram Janmabhoomi police mobilized with precision. Their initial focus was on Sitaram Das. Following a series of leads, they executed a search operation near the revered Hanuman Koti temple in the late afternoon. Strategically positioned behind the temple, they vigilantly observed the surroundings for any signs of suspicious behavior. Their vigilance bore fruit when they identified an individual matching Das's description. His mannerisms and movements aroused the officers' suspicions. Approaching with caution, they confirmed his identity as Das, also known as Vijay Chella Ramcharan Das. He was taken into custody without resistance, and the police uncovered documents about the violent crime in his immediate vicinity, thereby reinforcing the case against him. Meanwhile, the pursuit of Govind, alias Sanjay, continued unabated. Utilizing intelligence gathered during Das's arrest, the police traced Govind to Laxman Kila, a prominent landmark in Ayodhya. Officers converged on the area, resolute in their mission to capture the second suspect. In a meticulously coordinated operation, they located Govind as he attempted to merge with the crowd. Realizing he was encircled, he made a desperate attempt to escape, but the police swiftly apprehended him, ensuring the arrest was executed with minimal disruption. The successful capture of both suspects represented a monumental triumph for law enforcement, bringing closure to a case that had lingered in obscurity for nearly 2 decades. The law enforcement officials conveyed their profound relief at the opportunity to deliver justice to the family of Mahavir Singh, whose suffering had been exacerbated by the protracted quest for accountability. The discovery of crucial documents within the homes of the accused significantly bolstered the prosecution's case, guaranteeing that both individuals would stand trial for their purported involvement in the crime. As the news of the arrests circulated, the community of Gonda exhaled a collective sigh of relief, filled with hope that this long-anticipated saga would soon culminate in a courtroom resolution.